Fantastic. Welcome to today's playthrough Audit Tuesday. We have a special guest here, Dan Morrison and Shannon Noonan. Okay. And what we're going to talk about today is MSPs, of course, but what we're going to talk, and we have, a special guest, Dan Morrison, who runs his own MSP, more involved. But what we're going to talk about is getting comfortable with GRC at the MSP. Okay. GRC is what? Governance, risk, and compliance. And it's an acronym that isn't really all that used much by the MSPs. MSPs are known as great, people to help you with your directories, with your devices, with your applications. But when it usually comes to governance, risk, and compliance, it's usually left to other teams. So, Dan, you've jumped into this space, and Shannon, you're a GRC expert. So, first of all, hello, and thanks for playing through today.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Good deal. Good deal. So, first of all, Shannon, could you introduce yourself to the Audit Tuesday audience?
Hello, Audit Tuesday audience. As normal, I'm joining Garrett today, which is always fun. I'm Shannon Noonan, founder of HiNoon Consulting, and I do a lot of work around GRC, as Garrett noted, and that is helping organizations get through some of their pain points, whether it's through an audit, helping them meet regulatory requirements, or just function in general in regards to some IT security and finance processes.
Good deal. And Daniel, can you give us your background?
Yeah, so I've been in this space for about 4 years now, and before that, I was military and cyber and doing some other things around the world. So right now, we currently run an MSP more evolved. We also have a focus in AI and a few other things with there. But today, we're primarily going to talk about our MSP arm that we have and see if we can help people understand GRC.
Perfect. And Bill, give everyone a background what you do here at UATest.
Yeah, so I'm the channel sales director working with MSPs. In the past, I spent 8 years with Accenture in their cloud managed services practice and built and managed partner ecosystems with 3 different software companies.
Perfect. And Shannon, let's just get right into it. When you hear the term GRC, what does that mean to you, especially around compliance and especially around the concept of the enterprise and the pieces we'll jump into that MSP can take over. But let's just start. When you hear GRC and you being an expert in this and knowing you've been doing this for the last decade, what do you think?
What do I think? Sometimes I think it's scary and crazy, and why are we doing this to ourselves? But really, what I think is we've got to find a way to align security, IT, finance, and compliance and streamline the messaging, right? How do we make it not the scary item in the room or something that somebody doesn't want to talk about, and educate all the key individuals in regards to what they need to do, how they need to get it done, but also bringing the right people to the table.
Exactly. And Daniel, as an MSP founder and owner, before we get into GRC, said, how did you get into this, into the MSP space? Shannon's been doing GRC forever, and then you took the route as in the MSP.
So I got into this space because I saw a need for helping people inside of IT. I was having some conversations. I was actually in Fortune 500 before this. I was having some conversations with folks in the local community that I lived in Nevada, and there were some issues in the IT world, specifically around cyber. There was nobody in the area that could even understand cybersecurity and IT and how those things really should go together, believe it or not. So it's just, having a conversation, seeing a need, realizing that was a need that we could fill.
Perfect. And Bill, your background was in Accenture, straight out consulting, all that, right? So what have you been seeing in the MSPs? You've been there a year. Have you seen, a little convergence and more comfortability around the GRC space?
Yeah, I have. Some of the MSPs are utilizing UATest as an extension of their vCISO and in their risk and compliance services. They're helping their customers set a baseline for who has access to what applications and doing quarterly attestations for identity entitlements.
Got it. Okay, so Shannon, straight out, I mean, there is a reason why we do governance, right? And it usually revolves around sensitive data, PII, PHI, CUI. This all falls under regulatory compliance, right?
For the most part, right? Compliance has always been leaning on the fact that you have a customer that's requiring certain key elements. You have a regulation, whether it's a law or standard that needs to be followed. You are trying to secure data. So you bring in an individual that can help identify those key points, process and procedures, and then put something in place to make sure that it's aligned with the regulations, laws, and customer needs.
Yeah. So in your past, I mean, you've seen ones that haven't, they wind up getting fined or some other actions, right?
Right, there's so many different areas of where somebody can get fined, they can get breached, they can get hacked, or they just don't have the right individuals to do the job, right? Whether it's too much access in environment or not enough controls and processes in the change management world, right? There's so many different areas that are impacted. But a lot of what compliance does is really align to what the business needs are, right? If the business is in a healthcare industry, what are those needs that they have to meet to one, get clients or to get information? And compliance is supposed to be aligning that so they can help drive revenue. So I'm here to make sure that we meet the regulations. If we meet the regulations, you can have more clients to do the work, right? So it may look like an overhead cost, and it may look like one of those areas that are pain points or a check the box activity, but it really should be looked at as a revenue generating tool where if you meet the regulations, you meet the security requirements, you meet all of these things, and you have an expert come in and do the work, then you are more than likely going to be able to drive more revenue.
That's interesting. So is that what you're telling these CEOs you're working with, that hey, I know you see this as a cost burden, but you can actually, by differentiating yourself,
Well,
right?
if you look at most of your contracts, hospitals require some form of either HIPAA compliance because there's some
Right.
data, or high trust evidence, or SOC 2, or something along those lines. So if you have somebody come in and help design your environment from the very beginning, or come in to do that, you have contractual requirements that, one, drive it, two, regulations that require it. So if you start that out right with the right individual teaching you and training you how to do this, as well as getting your teams to meet those requirements, think of how many people you can go advise to or get work from, right? I can now go to a hospital, get a contract, and not be scared about the fact that they're saying I've got data locality requirements, I've got to meet high trust, I've got to meet HIPAA. You don't have to worry about that if you're already doing it and you know the clientele you're going after. You know who you're going after. You know if you're going to go to work with the government, you got to meet DFARS and FARS requirements. Okay, so do something about it before you get there versus trying to figure out how to do it when you get assessed, audited, or breached. Why are we doing it after the fact versus trying to do it before the fact? It goes even back to security. Why are we not being more preventive in regards to our environment versus reactive when something happens, right? So if you are more preventative, you don't have to worry about the fact that you need to meet these needs, which means you can say you're doing it versus lying about it to drive revenue.
I like that. And Dan said this is your life now, you know? I'd love to hear just your comment on that. I mean, first of all, and this is where I really do think MSP should be in GRC. I want to, created a product and then made it MSP, whatever, because you guys are such the adult in a room, you know, to people to begin with. Like, hey, you're saying, hey, I got this, I got this. Now, you're arming yourself, you, Dan, and your enterprise are arming yourself with GRC capabilities with Shannon, and you attest so that you can do GRC work. What is your dialogue like with your customers around this space?
So first off, I agree with Shannon and I agree with both of you. It's very, this is a much needed thing inside of the MSP space, especially when you're working with, small, medium businesses, enterprises, those types of things. The main conversation I have around specifically GRC is first off, are they in a regulated industry? I mean, there's a ton of stuff that's out there. So if you're in a regulated industry, I mean, you don't have some sort of GRC system in place, different tools, compliance, or if you haven't undergone the different types of audits, then you're already behind the power curve. And I can't count how many times I've gone into a business, and even folks that are required to be something like HIPAA compliant, they're like, oh no, we don't need to worry about that. We're HIPAA
Right.
compliant. And you just have this conversation with them. And you talk to them about fines, you talk to them about trust and things like that. And one of the things that I've learned to do to kind of get people on board with GRC, specifically as an MSP, is I don't talk about fines and I don't necessarily talk about that. I talk about their reputation.
Nice.
So I talk and I kind of go down this pathway with them on the biggest thing I get when I talk about these folks to these folks that are out there is, oh, that's a big company problem. And I say, well, even if you're using, EHR system, if they get compromised, and it doesn't matter how large the system is, you are the small business. And your clients are going to come to you and ask you what you've done to be compliant, or are you HIPAA secure, or whatever. I'm just going to use HIPAA as an example because we work, smaller businesses tend to be doctors' offices, dentist offices, physical therapists, those kinds of things that are out there. But if you kind of go down that pathway, what are you going to do? You think that the large EHR company is going to take this hit from a reputation standpoint? Yes, they will for a little bit, but you might actually lose your business completely over that. If you can't go back to your clients and the people that have invested in your company and tell them what you've done to be compliant, that's usually the route that I go down. The getting audited is, you got a 1 in a million chance of getting audited in certain aspects, but you have a very, very, very strong chance of being compromised. And what are you doing to make sure that your information is actually protected, your data is protected, your client's data is protected? So that is the method that I use to specifically go in and talk to clients about GRC.
Shannon, anything you're nodding your head when Dan was speaking?
Oh, it's so true. Right. It's the key areas. We talk, and Dan and I talk about this all the time. What is more likely to get audited or assessed, and who's going to actually do something about it? If you have a company that is publicly traded and in a HIPAA environment, they are going to meet all of their Sarbanes-Oxley requirements, no ifs, ands, or buts, because there is an auditor in there every single day. But they may not be meeting all their HIPAA requirements 100% throughout the environment because no one's coming in and looking at them. So
Yeah,
it's the fascinating piece of it is like, you're saying you're meeting it, you think you're meeting it, and then all of a sudden you lift up the hood of the car and you're saying, wait, I didn't tweak that side, and all of a sudden data's over there. Or this got out of control over here and all this access is there and nobody's looked at it. And that's because it's required as a law, but it's not looked at until there's a compromise. And that's a problem with a lot of these regulations. So a lot of people say, well, I don't need to do these things. Well, if you start doing it at the beginning and you figure out how to make it as part of your business structure, your business need to then drive revenue, you don't have to worry about a compromise because you're already doing the work. So how do you prevent that so that you're doing the right things? Because if you get compromised, guess what? You're going to do all the work anyway, but now you're going to get a fine on top of it.
Shannon, I love your proactive, and Dan and I were just brothers separated at birth or something, because I believe in the negative too. I mean, just look at 23andMe, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that really couldn't have helped them. Having a big data breach, everyone's like, oh, we're all, even my wife, non-technical people, everyone kind of gets that, if you've got the data, you can authenticate as someone. So that's a tough sell then, And I'm sure there's much more complexity about 23andMe and all that, but I'm sure we all can, come up with use cases or whatever around that. I mean, I would say go so far as even not even our customers, even the products, in this space, I mean, you know, we picked on Okta a lot, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with Microsoft. It's just that they are the targets, you
Mhm.
know?
Someone's going to find a way to get in.
Yes, they're the target. So it takes extra effort and extra diligence. And PHI, you know, for the healthcare is the most valuable information they say there is. So of course there is, and they have some of the most sloppy procedures. So that's and just in all, that's why I so much believe in the MSPs taking over GRC.
I
Because
didn't even say necessarily taking over GRCs, being responsible for GRCs, bringing
yes,
the right people to support them, right? So MSPs, one of the great things about it is they manage the environments. They are
right,
not the
right. You're
expert
already in
in
there.
doing the work, but a lot of them are saying that they are capable of doing certain things, and then they're not doing it because they don't understand how or what or where to do it. So they're saying, yes, I can get you compliant, but they haven't done all of it. They've done it maybe for a piece of the pie, not the whole environment. So then their customer thinks that the piece, because the piece of the pie is there, the whole environment's there, and they're not telling them that. So, or they're saying they can do these pieces, but they don't own it. So they only own a piece of the pie, not the whole pie. And so that's where, like, MSPs, because they don't understand the whole pie, they miss those elements that then they need to bring somebody in to help them with. So
No,
they can
you know, I think the core of it
Yeah, that
all
was going to be
is
my
okay with it,
suggestion
Dan.
too,
Yeah.
is people need to, from an MSP standpoint, if you've never worked in compliance and you've never worked inside of even security just in general, you do need help. And you need somebody to kind of come in and even just in a way kind of hold them through a couple of these processes. I mean, GRC is you know, at the end of the day, you're still kind of following a checklist in a way, but you have to know how deep that checklist goes, because that's kind of the kicker when it comes to the doing any kind of GRC work within you know, those the clients that MSPs generally serve.
Well, think of this, right? Now, Dan's an exception to the rule, right? An exception
But
to
no,
many.
but I
I'm an
do
exception to many
remember talking to Dan because I believe the exception is where we have to go,
Mhm.
right? We
Think
have to
about that.
go that way.
So think about this, right? In all of our capabilities here that we bring to the table, right? I could go be a domain admin. You don't want me to be a domain admin. That is not my skill set. You want me to make sure that all the elements around the domain admin are meeting key requirements and driving revenue, as well as making sure you're not getting fined, right? That's what you want me to do, but you don't want me to go configure an environment. So if you're a domain admin and that's your specialty, be the domain admin and bring somebody in to help you through the rest of it versus saying you can do all of it.
Yeah, here's where in this because I was just on a call the other day, and there's two ways people an IT person will talk, right? He will say, "I'm going to do this because someone really knows what's going on is telling me to do it," and that's where I see the MSP, right? Because they're the trusted advisor, they're the guys running it. So if the MSP says, "Here, you should be doing this," they're like, "Well, these are the guys that run my entire operation. They do it." Then there's that same person will say, "Oh, I have to do this because my auditor said so," you know? And that's a completely different way someone talks. They're like, "Oh, hey, we got to checkbox this." And that's why I see the genius of, you know, more evolved. What you're doing, Dan, is by being both, by being the trusted compliance, right? And yes, there's always external auditors, of course, right? No one's saying there's that, but being GRC and being GRC literate, right? You understand that, hey, guys, NIST CSF 2.0 PRA 05 principle of least privilege isn't just a regulation. It's a really good idea because if
Yeah.
our identities are rampant all over the map, we're in hell. We're going to be completely overtaken. Therefore, I recommend we do these best practices. And by the way, it's also, we have to include this in our HIPAA or our high trust reports. I think that's a much more legitimate, much more honest dialogue with the customer. That's my rant of the day. Yes. So Dan, I mean, so you have taken upon the job and more evolved to be both, right? To also, help help your customers in a good way understand the gaps they have to fill around compliance, but of course for security, right?
Right.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, I got a question because this came up the other day. Do Shannon and Dan, I don't know your answers. What's your feelings around frameworks? Should enterprises start with frameworks, or Dan, do you start people with frameworks, or go for that?
Do you want to go first, Dan?
Yeah, I'll fill that one real quick. Frameworks are important. Like, so a little bit of background. I'm also a pilot, right? So
Okay,
I fly airplanes. And if you go into an airplane, you don't want your pilot to not have their checklist out, right? So the
nice,
checklist is essentially the
nice.
framework.
That's a
Like if
really
you,
good
yeah,
no.
if you don't have something that you're following to make sure that you're doing it, you are going to miss stuff. And you're going to miss stuff immediately. Like it doesn't matter if you're using if you want to use CSF 1.1, 2.0, NIST 853, it doesn't matter which framework you want to actually use. Just get behind one of them, all right, and do that. Now, obviously, if you're in a regulated industry that requires you to do a specific framework, that's where you start. But in the MSP world, you may not get some of those folks that are out there. So I've used CIS, for example.
Yeah, I was
The
just gonna say
CIS
that.
it's a good,
Right.
better, best kind of framework that we use with. So if I'm going to start with the framework like immediately and we don't have any regulatory requirements, that's specifically the one that I've used in the past to kind of do that. CIS level 1, all right, because it's just good practice. Like there's nothing super crazy in that particular one. All right, do you have an inventory management? All right, is like the very first question that it asks, right?
Yeah.
So going down that pathway is like, well, what defines an inventory management? That's a problem I have with something like CIS. It doesn't really do a good job of defining what that is specifically. It's kind of left up to the auditor to determine what inventory management is. But that's why it's important, because it even begs like, well, what is my inventory management? Like, what do I have for that particular thing out there? What do I use for identity access management? What does that even mean? If you go to some MSPs, they may not even have an answer to that question, and using the framework will actually force them to go and look up some of this stuff that's out there. So I can go.
I love it,
But I
Dan.
think
That's great.
that's
Shannon,
good.
I see you biting at the chomping at there.
No, I agree. I agree. Frameworks are a great way to baseline it. Figure out which one makes the most sense to you. Go down that path. Also realize what is required versus not required.
Mhm.
And that is the key everyone needs to understand. And great example of it is a SOC 2 is not regulatory required at all. High trust is not regulatory required at all. It is usually a customer contractual requirement. That is all they're used for. The other things that are regulatory required, HIPAA, high tech, right? That's a regulation. DFARS and FARS is a regulation. Sarbanes-Oxley 404 is a regulation. It's required. People forget that. So they go and do things and someone tells you it's a regulation. ISO is not a regulation. It is a best practice to do something to meet a standard or to meet a law or to show that you're having security, right? A SOC 2 is to really show third parties that you've got a secure environment, right? A ISO is to show that you've got processes in place and to show that you're secure and doing things that are appropriate, right? High Trust has pigeoned themselves next to the HIPAA high tech laws. So they're saying if you meet High Trust, you'll meet these law requirements. But we have found, even though the people are High Trust, they're still getting hacked. Few people may understand that. But the dilemma is, if you don't start somewhere, you're not going to have anything.
And Shannon and Dan, wouldn't you agree? Because I've mapped UATS, a GRC product to many of the frameworks and the best practices. So, but Dan, I mean, you're giving good advice when you say, hey, start with CIS 18, right?
Yeah.
And you start knocking these out, because many of these, what I see, almost cut and paste, then map into the regulatories or whatever. If you're following these frameworks and you're following some best practices, it's going to be hit and bumped in the other ones, right, Shannon?
Yeah. Well, and it's not saying, it's understand what you have, what you need to do and how to get to the right place, right? Dan and I will look at it. If someone says they need to meet some requirements and they don't know what it is, do the Kickstart. Kickstart is a CIS. If they are going after federal work, you're doing NIST 800 171 or NIST 853 moderate. So it's really understanding what you're trying to do and your accomplishments. The bigger they are, the more detailed the controls are, the more direction you get, and the less that you're sitting there saying, guessing, well, should I or should I not do that? That's really what these frameworks do. They provide you the right guidance and the right details for the type of data you're securing, right? That's why federal people go after NIST 853. It is very incremental, right? It allows you to know how to meet DFARS and FARs versus just kind of guessing based off of what the law says. So it really understand your environment, but also what most people need to forget is cyber insurance. We have not talked about cyber insurance requirements. Cyber insurance is in every single organization, and I am sure most of them are not doing what they're supposed to do based off their cyber insurance requirements. So you may not have PHI or financial, everyone has financial data, but you may not have CUI data or PHI data, right? Healthcare and governmental data. Or you'll have personal data, so you got to meet those laws, but you sure as heck will probably have cyber insurance so that if an incident happens, you have that call that you can pick up and get an incident team there. But
I'm gonna pop in on that too.
You're
From a
gonna
cyber
get paid
insurance
out?
perspective, like as an MSP, we're the ones that usually like provide that information and even attest to what's being done. From a cyber insurance perspective, almost all of my clients that are, and they all have cyber insurance. The very first stop for that is us. Okay, what do we have? Because they don't know.
I couldn't agree more.
They don't know when it comes to that kind of stuff. Or sometimes I think we got a client that way. They're like, hey, we know that you do cyber. Can you fill this out for me? I'm like, no. So, well, why do we go? We have to go in and audit your environment, figure out what you're actually using, those types of things. So I like Shannon like bringing up the cyber insurance piece because that's a really big deal.
And most people are not looking at it they're filling out this checkbox.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing all the things. Now, here's the catch-22. Everybody's worried about an incident occurring. Well, if you're not meeting your security requirements, your IT requirements, your compliance requirements, and you get hacked, you get ransomware, and you have the incident team, you call up your cyber insurance, the incident team comes in and does all of this work, and they find out you don't have a security policy in place. Guess what? You're not going to get paid out.
Wow. Right. So I think the other way with the cyber insurance, where are they giving discounts, for, better practices, et cetera? Have you seen that now, Shannon?
From what I'm hearing, some are. It all depends on the organization, but you have to prove it. So you got to prove you got multi-factor in place. You got to prove you got vulnerability scanning in place. And the insurance companies are getting smarter and asking. So just get ready for it. They're going to start wanting to see evidence submitted with it because they're spending way more money. I mean, ransomware and malware and everything else in this world is what, a $32 trillion industry this year?
I have to always show this slide of my prezos like this. And this is my favorite lawyer, and I don't have many of those. This is Cynthia Stammer. She was presenting at I think it was ISSS up in LA. And she was saying just this. And she said, hey, she's a defense attorney for enterprises that get, cyber breached and all that. She says, I can't protect you guys. You guys, if you're not keeping the evidence, and you're saying, Shannon, they need the evidence. You need the evidence of best practices for regulations. You need it for cyber insurance. And then my friend Cynthia Stammer, we've done some webinars that said together that the enterprises need to keep the evidence to be protected once they get breached, et cetera. So
here's the thing, and that line is great. Ensure all required evidence created and retained. If you have no formal documentation, which is what a lot of these frameworks do, if you have no formal documentation, you haven't completed the work. If there's nothing documented, it never happened.
Nice.
Even if it happened, if it's not documented, if it's not formalized, if it's not evidence, it doesn't exist, it never happened. Because that's what they're going to look at and say, well, yeah, you said you did it, but there is nothing for me to prove that. So you want to make sure you have all of the necessary evidence to prove that you are doing what you need to do.
I love it. Love it. So Shannon, and Dan, you take this away. So how do you, and I think you answered this a little, Dan, so I'll start with you. How do you, position, this type of governance, this type of evidence, not only collection, but retention and quantification to your, to your enterprises that maybe don't understand governance yet? They're, they're running too fast to say to be slowed down or whatever. How do you position that?
So I just kind of position it into whatever regulatory framework that they actually are required to be in. Like
Nice.
I mean,
Okay.
it just kind of goes down that pathway. If, like we were talking about before, if you're working, if you're going to work with federal government, are you a 853? Are you a 171? Like,
Right.
where do you fit inside of that area? Are you HIPAA? Like learn a little bit about the company during your initial discussions there, or if you're on the MSP side, and that's really what we're talking about here. You probably know more about that company than the vast majority of the people know about the companies that they're operating, just because every company is a technology company in 2025. That's just the
Nice.
way of it, right? So you being the technology service provider for that company, if you don't understand how they operate, first you need to fix that. And then from there, you need to understand what that regulatory requirement is. So if you're an MSP and you work with a doctor's office, you should know that there's supposed to be HIPAA required. And eventually, I mean, look at CMMC, look at some of these other frameworks, things like that. You are going to have to attest that you yourself, as an MSP, all right, are meeting the same level of requirements that are out there. Look at what they're doing in Europe.
Yeah.
That's gonna eventually work its way down into the things that we're doing here, especially if you want to grow into other markets outside of the US. That's something that you have to be aware of. So if you have clients that have to meet this requirement, and this is the perfect way to kind of break into this, right? If you have other clients that have to go and do this, and you have other stuff, why don't you just kind of turn inward? All right, take a look at what you have going on and make yourself compliant. Go through that process. And then once you do that, you can even partner with another firm like HiNoon or something like that that can go through and help you with that process. Understand what it is that you have to do, and then you can go forward with the GRC or you attest. Like,
Yeah.
there's a ton of different ways that you have to do it, but you have to put it forward. You have to put it at the forefront of what you do. You have to know your operations. You have to know your customers' operations, what they do. And once you understand that, you're going to understand what's required for regulatory framework. You just have to put it in front. And believe it or not, once you have a good system, regulatory framework in place, your operations actually run better because you actually have all of the documentation that you need to be successful as an MSP. This is not one of those things that bolts on and it's terrible. If you do it the right way, you implement it correctly, you have the right partners on board, it makes your business run better.
And that's exactly what you guys do at More Evolved, and that's why we partner, because you set it up from the beginning, not at the end. You're not doing it as a reactor, you're doing it at the beginning. And that's what more people need to do. How do you do it from the beginning and build it all the way through, right? We talk about duct tape and glue. A lot of environments are duct taped and glued together versus doing it the right way. And that's because they were told halfway through a process they had to do something new. And instead of fixing it from the beginning, they just put something there. They taped it together, right? Well, do it the right way. Look at the whole process holistically and do it the right way from the beginning, even if it means you have to go back 3 steps, because it's going to make your processes better. It's going to make you able to be systematic. It's going to allow you to have the right partners on board, and you're not going to have a team of 20. You could have a team maybe of 5, because you've got more system approaches, you're streamlined, and you've got a better solution there versus being told you got to go to 5 different people to get a solution.
And then I had 2 follow-up questions here. One, so do you see this as a good way to, differentiate your MSP? That,
Absolutely.
hey, anyone can, help you, manage your Android and your iPhones, but let's go. I understand your
I'd
business,
say
et
that
cetera.
too. People ask me that question when we even talk about some pricing and things like that. I'm like, if you want an IT, go to the neighborhood kid up the road. Like, I tell them that. This is some of the
You
things
rock. That's
that's what I
great.
tell them. I'm like, if you want, like anyone can be an IT, you can get on YouTube
Right.
and figure out how to fix a computer, Chat GPT, I mean, you name it. But if you
Right.
want a solutions provider, all right, that's the differentiator right there. You start looking at some of the even and well, I started that way. That was where you start in the MSP world. You start by solving a simple problem, and then you grow into something else. But it's at some point in time, you got to make this tipping point where you're no longer just being reactive. You have to be proactive, and that's really the difference between a IT provider where you can go talk to this other person. Hey, my computer's broke. Can you fix it for me? Versus proactive, where you're seeing stuff coming, and that's where GRC that's where it shines, right? Is really in that
I couldn't agree. Now I got a question for both of you, Shannon and Dan. Do you see this space, the MSP space, managed services, goes to more verticalizing, right?
It's got to evolve. All of us have to
Okay.
evolve.
Yeah,
Technology
because I see a
is
lot,
amazing.
hey, we know we handle healthcare, we hear, defense, whatever. But I do see, you mentioned CMMC. I'm seeing more and more consultant MSC focusing on the defense contractors.
Well,
And we're
it's a hot ticket
also,
item. So the defense world has over 300,000 vendors. All of them have some form of CMMC that have to be met. So think of that. Like, so it's the hot ticket item because someone's gonna, it's what SOC 2 became, right? But the dilemma is it's a law. We're right, and that's why I said it. SOC 2 is not a law. If you lie and you can't prove it and you don't have the evidence and you just get someone that's gonna check the box and something happens, you could get in very big trouble for not meeting the laws and regulations.
perfect. All right. So Shannon, I'm going to put you on the spot for you a test there. There's a concept in governance compliance called identity attestation. And Kashif, get ready with the demo. Shannon, what is identity attestation and why would someone who cares about governance, especially an MSP who's supposed to be caring about governance, care about identity attestation?
Well, you always need to know who's in your environment. Are they the right people? Do they have the right access? And if you're not looking at it on a regular basis, you'll get someone that has inappropriate access or potentially hacked, right? How do people get in? It's through some form of an access, whether it's a stale account that's just sitting there, a service account that hasn't been looked at in eons, or they created their own account, nobody looked at it. So like, let's think about it. What is it going to do? UTAS allows you to continuously, systematically look at your environment, and you've got to figure it out. Otherwise, you're going to not follow least privilege, rules-based access, and yeah, it's going to become a nightmare for you. Maybe it won't.
Here it goes.
Maybe it won't. But
this
let me give you a story before we go
for it. Go for it, Shannon.
And Dan, jump in here. We met somebody about 2 weeks ago, and we were chatting with them, and they said, oh, they got breached, but they cleaned it up. And then they told us a story about how, well, every time they create a new user in the environment, there's an email that goes out automatically from a C-suite person that then asks them to buy a gift card. And we looked at them and said, oh, your environment is still impacted. Someone's not looking at their access. Somebody's not looking at those configurations. Somebody is not looking at it because there's no way they would create a user and automatically an email gets sent within minutes of that account being created.
So yeah, that was an interesting thing, and we were talking to them. It was another typical conversation where, oh, our MSP says we have security on lock, and they said that nothing's happening, and it was the conversation went just down that road. It was like, okay, so if this is happening, then both of those things are not true. You have to go down and you should just ask your MSP, do you do security? And what is it? What is that? What does security mean to you? Because
Love it, Dan.
like security for Shannon and I, we have our own definition of security.
Right.
So, and our definition of security is around what these requirements are that are out there. Like, what are we supposed to meet? And on top of that, we've got other stuff that, that our clients specifically want, but it all comes down to data, right? So how is your data protected? That's what security really is in a lot of different ways. It's your data protected, whatever that data looks like for you. And in this particular instance, data is not protected. And you're right, that was a very interesting conversation.
Yeah. And if they're saying, hey, we offer two-factor, you're like, great, but is that it? I mean, are you caring about who has access? Or insider threat, privilege creep, that kind of problem.
Yep.
So
Are you using RBAC? Like what are you using to like determine your access levels? So yeah, I'm excited to see the demo.
Yeah, yeah. So this is, here we go. This is your standard company. They got someone who cares. They're playing a risk manager role. I don't care if they're IT director, security director, whatever. They know they have these. That's why they talk to Shannon and Dan. They understand those. But this is with a real problem, all their identities. This is what UATest does. It ingests those roles. There you go. Coming up, Kashif. They ingest these roles, right? And what UATest does is says, okay, let's find out if the people who are granting those roles, the business leaders, actually still believe those people should have those roles, permissions, and entitlements. It does an attestation. That's why it's called UATest. This is all automatic through email, through Slack. It pushes out these attestation confirmation messages, and then it aggregates sometimes thousands. We literally have a customer runs 900,000 roles through this engine. Okay, so yes, we can handle your workload. And then an attestation report is done and the cleanup is done on the IAM systems like Azurity and Okta. Okay, so you're getting both. You're getting the security by cleaning up the roles and you're getting the compliance report. Take it away, Kashif. I took away a little bit of our time with some struggles with LinkedIn in the beginning, but take it away with a quick demo of how this works and how this works in the MSP environment.
Sure. Thank you, Garrett.
Thank you,
Greetings,
Kashif.
everyone. And let me know when you can see my
Yeah, I
screen,
see
and
the
I'll
screen. I
just.
see the KPI screen right there. Key performance indicator. How many attestations the enterprise has done lately? Yes.
Great. And that was the latest addition, by the way, in the metrics and the analytics. So this is the UTest dashboard. When we talk about identity access review, this is what you integrate with your IAM, whatever you're using. So that's just a starting point. You integrate with your Microsoft Entra ID, you integrate with your Oktas or Jump Cloud or whatever you have that you're using as the source of identity. Then it pulls the entitlements. It pulls the entitlements directly from your IAM into UATest in order to create an audit for you so you can delegate it out to the people who really matter. That's like your direct line managers, your security and compliance people, or your application owners and group owners, whoever is responsible for reviewing and saying either yes or no to their access and the level of privileges. This is what this tool enables you to do instead of doing that manually on your Excel sheets and then taking screenshots and then following up with those managers, whether they have completed the task or not. So it's a cumbersome process, which we have automated, simplified it, so you can, without sending out a single email manually, you can delegate these functions out to who really can say yes or no to these identities and their access. So let's say this is integrated to one of my Entra ID environments. Let's say somebody from Dan's team, if he's doing this audit on a client's behalf, goes into the tool and decides to pull users that have access to a certain application. For example, I'll target the finance application in this demo, for example, right? So I just give it a date range, could be days, could be a couple of weeks, depending upon the number of users in that particular app or resource. And then because we are plugged into your IAM, it will provide you a list of groups and applications that you can target. You can go for multiple, you can go for single application and fetch the entitlements directly from your IAM. So it has fetched here 4 unique users that have access to this particular application that I'm targeting. That's how it shows it. You have the principal, you have the major profile attributes on this page here, including the username, the email of that user, which by the way, we use as the unique identifier in our audits. It has the manager's information in case you would like to assign it to their managers. And then the rest of the details under here just to save the real estate. So you have the roles, you have the last password change date, you have the last login date. If it's there in your IAM in the user profile, you have the status of the user, whether active or inactive. So when all this information is pulled into this audit, it makes it easier for the reviewers to decide whether this person should have access to this particular resource, or is he having enough access or minimum access to perform his job when he gets into this application. So now, as an admin, all you need to do, just auto delegate. Just push these out. Instead of like doing all of these attestations yourself on your own, you just choose who do they needs to go out to the managers, to the owners, to the security people, whatever. Just click confirm, send them off, and the tool starts pushing these out to the targeted audience. Once you refresh, it's going to tell you that these users have been sent out to these respective managers, to the group owners and everything. The other side, which is the reviewer side, will only get this notification along with the link to the audit. All they need to do is click on it, go inside, see who reports to them and who they're responsible for in terms of reviewing their identities, and just click through the GUI and recommend whether you certify this access or you need to revoke this access in case the person no longer needs that access or has left the organization, right? So let's say I certify this person here and revoke the other. It gives you the recommendation along with the timestamp um, of what to do. And that's all the manager has to do instead of writing emails and taking screenshots and going through the Excel sheets. The only manual thing a manager can do here is to put in a comment to justify the action, whether, well, that's the reason I need to revoke this access, or that's the reason I need to redelegate this person to the admin or to any other reviewer because he's not reporting to me today. So that's all. Now he can go back to his day job, and I, as an admin, can come in, refresh my page, and see who has completed the task. And for the rest of these users or the managers, still, you don't have to write a single nag email. We have automated that part as well. So,
Yeah, and we'll talk this is what we've trained the managed service providers to do, to offer this as a service. Can you, and I'm cutting you off just because I had struggled with LinkedIn at first. Can you show, oh, look at that. This is,
yeah,
gosh,
I just wanted to make it relevant because
good.
this was
Yes.
one client that Dan and his team was looking after and running audits for them. But here they can manage, or you can manage multiple clients like this and their environments and do the audits on their behalf, right? You can add 1, 2, 300. How many, Bill can explain, or maybe Garrett can, how you license that, but it's a
Bill will
platform
take the
you can have.
licensing, show the
Yeah,
functionality, and let Bill explain the licensing. Go for it.
pretty simple. Once you add a client, you're here in this platform under your tenant, it will create a POC by default with 100 licenses. And then you'll be able to convert that POC into live account from the same portal by adding number of licenses and adding an expiry date to it. And Bill can explain how it's just licensed. But this is essentially how you can do it, because from here, it will give you access to directly launch their dashboard or get into their tenant and start running audits on their behalf. Bill?
Yeah, so real quick, what Kashif is showing is we would come in, we would set this MSP portal up for the MSP, and basically there's no charge until you actually set up a user and consume licenses and run your audit. So this could sit there for a couple of months. Then you have a customer that needs to run an internal audit. You run it for that month, and we would charge you for the number of licenses that you use for that audit the following month. Simple as that.
Yeah,
Thank you,
that's
Bill.
it. Pay as you go model. All right. Here, I'll just stop showing and we'll conclude this. All right, Dan, how do people get to know you? How can they contact you?
All right, give me just a second here. I'll share my screen. They can go to our webpage, moreevolve.com. They can email us at info@moreevolve.com. and I'll just kind of throw up a quick
Sure.
a quick thing here real
Fantastic.
quick.
So, talk to Dan directly and he'll talk to you about, hosting, of course, GRC. And while he's doing that, Bill, how can people get a hold of us at UAttest?
Just reach out to us at sales@uattest.com, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn.
There you go. And there we go. There's more involved. And thanks, Shannon, and thanks, Dan, for playing through today. We'll have this all recorded and cleaned up and all that. There's more involved. And yes, at UAttest, just ping us at sales@uattest.com. We're good to go. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks.
Garrett.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.